The Galactic Concord had kept peace among the stars for 3,000 years, and everyone knew how they did it: political marriages. When two empires wanted peace, they did not sign papers or shake hands or make empty promises. They bonded their children together, and for 3,000 years, this system had worked perfectly. But now something strange was happening at the edge of known space. The Vethkari Empire had finally decided to offer their only princess for a bonding alliance, and the entire galaxy had gone mad with excitement and fear. The Vethkari were older than most species could remember. They had been among the three founding empires that created the Concord, and their power was beyond question, but no one had ever seen them. Not really. The Vethkari were shapeshifters of the highest order, and their true forms were said to be so strange and so impossible that lesser beings lost their minds. Just from looking at them, some whispered that Princess Cyrovan was the most beautiful creature in existence. Others claimed she was a monster beyond imagination. The Vethkari said nothing at all. They simply announced that their princess would accept suitors at the neutral station called Terminus Prime, and within weeks delegations from 47 worlds had arrived. The station had never been so crowded. Ambassadors and princes and warlords filled every corridor. They brought gifts of gold and jewels and rare metals. They brought promises of trade and military support and eternal friendship. They brought their finest candidates for the bonding. And one by one they learned the rules. The rules were simple but terrifying. Each delegation could send one candidate to meet the princess in her private chambers. The candidate would have exactly 1 hour to speak with her. If any candidate agreed to the bonding, they would be wed immediately. But here was the part that made everyone nervous. They would not see her true form until after the ceremony was complete. The bonding was permanent and unbreakable. Once it was done, there was no going backs. So whoever agreed to marry the princess would be agreeing to spend their entire life bonded to something they had never seen, something that might drive them insane the moment they looked at it. The first candidate was a Corvani prince named Velthax. Corvani were a proud warrior species with scales like emeralds and eyes like burning coals. Prince Velthax had conquered entire planets by himself. He had killed a sand dragon with nothing but a knife. He feared nothing in the galaxy. He lasted 11 minutes in the princess's chambers before he came running out screaming. His scales had turned white and his eyes were wild, and he had to be sedated by his own guards. He never spoke about what happened in that room. The second candidate was a Theshan ambassador named Marazelth. Theshans were known for their calm minds and their ability to handle stress. Ambassador Morazel had negotiated peace treaties between species that had been at war for centuries. She had talked down terrorists and madmen and rogue AI systems. She lost it 20 minutes before she collapsed in the doorway, shaking and crying. When she finally recovered enough to speak, she said only one thing: she is not what we thought. The third candidate was a Drelkai warlord named Krathi Unbroken. The Drelkai were massive creatures with 4 arms and skin like stone. Krath had earned his name by surviving things that should have killed him 100 times over. He had been shot and stabbed and blown up and thrown into the vacuum of space. Nothing had ever broken him. He lasted 7 minutes. When he came out, his stone skin had cracked and his forehands were trembling. "I would rather face 1,000 armies," he said to his generals, than spend another moment in that darkness. One by one the candidates entered. One by one they fled. Yathi Empath had a seizure after 3 minutes. The Corellian telepath ran out after 5 minutes with blood dripping from his nose. The silicon-based Trovax ambassador simply shut down and had to be rebooted. After 39 candidates had failed, the delegations began to lose hope. Perhaps no one could bond with the Vethkari princess. Perhaps she would remain alone forever. Perhaps this whole thing had been a mistake. And then the humans arrived. Their ship was small, just a single diplomatic frigate called the Persistence. The other species barely noticed them at first. Humanity was new to the galactic stage. They had only discovered faster than light travel 60 years ago. They had no great empire. They had no ancient history. They had no psychic powers or special abilities. They were just soft, squishy creatures from a small blue planet at the edge of nowhere. The other delegations laughed when they learned that humanity had sent a candidate. "What can a human possibly offer the Vethkari?" asked the Corvani ambassador with a sneer. "They will run faster than anyone," joked the Veshan delegation. "Perhaps they will set a new record for shortest time in the chamber," said the Dralkai warlord, who was still recovering from his own failure. The human candidate did not seem bothered by the mockery. His name was Marcus Chun, and he was 42 years old. He had gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from laughing. He was not a prince or a warlord or an ambassador. He was a commander in the Earth Space Force, a simple military officer who had volunteered for this mission. He had no noble blood running through his veins. He had no great wealth to offer. He had no psychic shields to protect his mind. Was just a mana winnower who had lost his wife 3 years ago to a disease called cancer. Man who spent his evenings reading poetry from alien cultures. A man who had specifically requested this assignment after reading everything he could find about the Vethkarith. Night before his meeting with the princes, the other human diplomats tried to talk him out of it. "You do not have to do this," said Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, who led the Earth delegation. "I know," Marcus replied. "The others who went in there were stronger than you and faster than you, and they had abilities you cannot imagine. I know. What makes you think you can succeed where they failed?" Marcus smiled, and it was a gentle smile full of something the ambassador could not quite name. "Because I am not trying to succeed," he said. "I am just trying to meet her." The ambassador did not understand, but the next morning Marcus Chum put on his dress uniform and walked toward the princess's chambers while the entire galaxy watched and waited for another human to fail. The hour in the dark, the door to the princess's chambers was tall and black and covered with symbols that Marcus could not read too. Vethkari guards stood on either side, but Marcus could not tell what they looked like because they wore armor that hid their forms completely. "You may enter," one of them said in a voice like rustling leaves. "You may leave whenever you wish." "Thank you," Marcus said, and he meant it. The door opened, and Marcus stepped inside. The darkness hit him immediately. This was not ordinary darkness. This was not the darkness of a room with the lights turned off. This was absolute, complete, total darkness. There was no light at all, not a single photon. His eyes tried to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. He could not see his hand in front of his face. He could not see the floor beneath his feet. He could not see anything at all. "You may leave whenever you wish," came a voice from somewhere in the darkness. It was the most beautiful and terrifying voice Marcus had ever heard. It sounded like wind blowing through crystal chimes. It sounded like music played on instruments that had never been invented. It sounded like something that was not meant to be heard by human ears. "Why would I leave?" Marcus asked as he carefully felt his way forward. "I just got here." There was silence, a long, heavy silence that seemed to fill the entire room. "You cannot see me," the princess finally said. "I noticed," Marcus replied, and his voice was calm and even friendly. "That is all right with me. You do not fear what you cannot perceive?" Marcus found something that felt like a cushioned seat, and he sat down slowly. "Should I fear you?" he asked. Another silence. "The others feared me. The others ran away screaming." Marcus agreed. "But you asked if I fear what I cannot perceive, and the answer is no." "Why?" Marcus leaned back and thought about the question. It was a good question. It deserved a good answer. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Her name was Elena, and she had cancer, and toward the end she became very sensitive to light." The darkness seemed to shift around him, but he continued. Even a small amount of light caused her terrible pain, so we would sit together in complete darkness just like this, and we would talk for hours. That sounds difficult, the princess said, and her voice was softer now. It was beautiful. Marcus replied, I learned something important during those nights in the dark with her. What did you learn? I learned that you do not need to see someone to know them, and you do not need to see someone to love them. The silence that followed was different from the ones before, was not heavy or threatening. It was surprised. You are strange, the princess said. I have been told it before, Marcus admitted with a small laugh, but I prefer to think of myself as curious. Curious about what? About you, Marcus said simply. About your people and your culture and your 1,000-year morning songs. You know of our morning songs? I read everything I could find about the Vethkari before I came here, Marcus explained. Your poetry is beautiful even in translation, and your songs are heartbreaking in the best possible way. Most species do not bother to learn about us, the princess said. They only see our power and our mystery. That seems lonely. Another surprised silence. It is, she admitted. For the next hour they talked. Marcus asked about her childhood, and she told him about growing up in a palace where no one could look at her. She asked about Earth, and he told her about blue oceans and green forests and cities that glowed at night. He asked about her favorite books, and she described stories written in dimensions that humans could not perceive. She asked about his wife, and he told her about Elena's laugh and her kindness and how much he missed her every single day. As they talked, the princess tested him in ways he did not fully understand. Her voice changed and became harsh and grating like metal scraping against metal. He did not run. Her voice became soft and seductive like honey dripping from a comb. He did not run. Her voice became alien and wrong in ways that made his skull ache and his brain hurt. Did not run. She released pheromones into the air, and the room filled with the smell of decay and burning and things that had no human name. He wrinkled his nose, but he did not run. Finally, she let her true form brush against his hand. It was not a hand that touched him. It was not a tentacle or a claw or anything he could identify. It was something his mind could not process, something that existed in more dimensions than he could perceive. For a moment the universe tilted sideways, and Marcus felt like he was falling through infinity. His heart raced, and his breath caught in his throat, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to run away, but he did not run. Instead, he took a deep breath and steadied himself. Does it hurt you? He asked quietly. The princess pulled back in shock. What? When I touch you? Marcus clarified. Does it hurt you? No one has ever asked me that, she said, and her voice trembled with something that might have been tears. In 107 years of meeting suitors from across the galaxy, not one of them has ever asked if touching me caused me pain. Well, I am asking, Marcus said gently. It does not hurt, she replied. It just feels strange because I have not been touched by another being in so very long. That sounds lonely, Marcus said again. It is the loneliest thing in the universe. Marcus reached out his hand into the darkness. May I? He asked, slowly, carefully. Something that was not a hand wrapped around his fingers. They sat like that in the darkness, holding hands like two children afraid of the night. You are not running, the princess whispered. No. Why not? Because running would mean leaving you alone in the dark, Marcus said. And I know what that feels like. When the hour ended, the Vethkari attendants opened the doors, expecting to find another broken suitor. Instead, they found the human commander, sitting peacefully with his hand resting on something they could not quite see, talking about a breakfast food from Earth called pancakes. They are flat cakes made from batter, Marcus was explaining. And you put syrup on them, which is a sweet, sticky liquid made from trees. That sounds disgusting, the princess said, but there was laughter in her voice. That sounds like you have never tried them, Marcus replied. And I think you would like them if you gave them a chance. The attendants did not know what to say. No one had ever made the princess laugh before. No one had ever stayed the full hour. No one had ever held her hand. They stood in shocked silence as Marcus Chun rose to his feet and straightened his uniform. "Thank you for talking with me," he said to the darkness. "It was the best conversation I have had in a very long time." And then he walked out of the chambers with a smile on his face, while the entire galaxy tried to understand what had just happened. The blind bargain. The Great Hall of Terminus Prime had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 worlds stood in stunned silence as Marcus Chun walked to the center of the room. The Vethkari High Priest floated behind the ceremonial altar, waiting for the human to speak. Everyone expected him to say that he needed time to think about his decision. Everyone expected him to ask for more information about what the princess truly looked like. Everyone expected him to do what any sensible being would do and walk away from this madness. Instead, Marcus Chun looked directly at the High Priest and said 6 words that changed the history of the galaxy. "I accept the bond with Princess Cyrovan." The hall erupted into chaos. The Kervani ambassador jumped to his feet and demanded that the human be tested for mental illness. The Theshan delegation filed a formal protest, claiming that humans were too primitive to understand what they were agreeing to. The Drokai warlord, who had lasted only 7 minutes in the princess's chambers, stared at Marcus with a mixture of respect and horror. "This is madness," shouted someone from the back of the room. "The human has lost his mind," cried another voice. "He does not know what he is doing," insisted a third. Even the Earth delegation tried to intervene. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka pushed through the crowd and grabbed Marcus by the arm. "You cannot do this," she hissed in his ear. "You have not seen what she truly is." "I know," Marcus replied calmly. "The Vethkari could be using this as a way to infiltrate humanity, and we would have no defense against them." "I know. This bond is permanent and unbreakable, and you will be tied to her for the rest of your life." "I know. Then why are you doing this?" Marcus smiled at the ambassador and gently removed her hand from his arm. "Because she has been alone for 107 years, he said, "and I do not want her to be alone anymore." The ambassador stared at him like he had grown a second head. "That is not a good enough reason to bind yourself to an unknowable alien entity. It is the only reason that matters," Marcus replied. The Vethkari High Priest raised one appendage, and silence fell over the hall. "The human has made his choice," the priest announced in a voice that echoed from every direction at once. "The bonding ceremony will proceed." What followed was unlike anything the gathered species had ever witnessed. The High Priest spoke words in a language that predated the Galactic Concord. The words seemed to vibrate through reality itself, making the walls shake and the lights flicker. Marcus stood perfectly still as the ancient ritual washed over him. He felt something changing inside his mind, something opening, something connecting. It was like a door being unlocked in a part of his brain he never knew existed, and through that door he felt her Cyrovan, felt her fear and her loneliness. He felt the weight of 107 years of isolation pressing down on her soul. He felt how desperately she wanted this to work, and how terrified she was that he would reject her once he saw her true form. Through the new connection in his mind, he sent her a simple message: "I am not going anywhere." He felt her surprise, and then her gratitude, and then something warm and bright that might have been the beginning of love. The ceremony lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was complete, the High Priest made a gesture, and the lights in the great hall began to brighten. "The bond is sealed," the priest declared. "What was separate is now joined, and what was hidden shall now be revealed." The princess emerged from the shadows, and the great hall descended into screaming chaos. Marcus would never be able to fully describe what he saw in that moment. Cyrovan was vast. She was impossible. She existed in dimensions that human eyes were not designed to perceive. She was made of light and shadow woven together in patterns that defied geometry. She had angles that pointed in directions that did not exist. She had colors that had no names in any human language. She was beautiful in the way that a supernova is beautiful. She was terrifying in the way that the crushing heart of a black hole is terrifying. She was truth without mercy and existence. Without apology around Marcus, the other species were falling apart. The Corvani prince fainted on the spot. The Dishan ambassador screamed and covered her eyes. The Drelkai warlord dropped to his knees and began praying to gods he had not believed. For decades, 3 artificial intelligence observers who had been recording the ceremony overloaded and had to be rebooted cameras. Exploded sensors melted. The very fabric of reality seemed to bend around the princess as she revealed herself to the galaxy for the first time, and Marcus Chun stood perfectly still and looked at his wife. She was watching him with something that might have been eyes waiting, trembling, terrified that this human who had been so brave in the darkness would finally run now that he could see what she truly was. "You are not running," she said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "No," Marcus agreed. "I am not." "How is this possible?" she asked. "The others cannot even look at me without losing their minds, and yet you stand there like you are looking at something ordinary. You are not ordinary," Marcus said as he walked toward her through the chaos of screaming aliens and broken equipment. "You are extraordinary and beautiful, and I am very glad to meet you properly at last." "Beautiful?" she repeated like she had never heard the word before. "Beautiful," Marcus confirmed. "Different from what I expected, but beautiful all the same. But my form defies your comprehension, and your eyes cannot process what they are seeing." "That is true," Marcus admitted. "My brain is having a very difficult time right now, and I will probably have a headache for a week. Then how can you look at me and call me beautiful?" Marcus reached out and took something that was not quite a hand in his own very human fingers. "Because I already knew you were beautiful," he said. "I learned that in the darkness when we talked about poetry and pancakes and loneliness. You cannot see my true form." She protested weakly. "I can see enough," Marcus replied. "And what I cannot see with my eyes I can feel through our bond." He smiled up at the impossible geometry of light and shadow that was now his wife. "Besides," he added, "the best things in life are the ones you have to take on faith." Around them, the great hall was still in chaos. Medics were rushing to help fallen diplomats. Engineers were trying to repair damaged equipment. The other species were staring at the human and the princess with expressions of complete disbelief. But Marcus and Sarovan did not notice any of it. They stood together in the middle of the storm, holding hands like they had in the darkness. 2 lonely souls who had somehow found each other across the vast emptiness of space, and for the first time in 107 years. Princess Sarovan of the Vethkari Empire did not feel alone. The galaxy watches. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. A human had bonded with the Vethkari princess. A human had looked upon her true form and had not gone insane. A human had called the most terrifying being in known space beautiful. Within days, every news network in the Galactic Concord was talking about Marcus Chun. They called him the blind groom because he had agreed to the bond without seeing his bride. They called him the mad human because surely only madness could explain what he had done. They called him 100 different names in 100 different languages, but the one thing they all agreed on was that he had done something impossible. Scientists from across the galaxy wanted to study him. How had his mind survived the sight of the princess in her true form? The Kovani brought their best psychic scanners. The Deshans sent their most advanced brain mapping technology. The Drelkai contributed their neural analysis equipment. For weeks they tested Marcus and prodded him and scanned every corner of his mind, and what they found confused them completely. There is nothing special about his brain, reported the lead Corvani scientist with obvious frustration. It is a standard human brain with standard human limitations. Then how did he survive? demanded the Theshan research director. We do not know. What do you mean you do not know? Shouted the Drolkai medical officer. You have been studying him for weeks, and we have found nothing, the Corvani admitted. His brain should have broken just like everyone else, but it did not. Marcus, who had been sitting patiently through all of this, cleared his throat. May I offer a suggestion? He asked politely. The scientist looked at him like they had forgotten he could speak. Please, said the Corvani. I think the reason my mind did not break is because I did not expect it to break. The scientist stared at him blankly. Explain, said the Theshan. When I walked into that dark room, I was not trying to survive or protect myself or resist something terrible. Marcus said, I was just trying to meet someone and have a conversation. That makes no sense, protested the Drelkai. Perhaps not to you, Marcus agreed. But humans have a saying on Earth that I think applies here. What saying? If you go looking for monsters, you will find them everywhere. But if you go looking for friends, you might be surprised by what you find. The scientists did not know what to do with this information. They wrote long reports about human psychology and the strange way that human brains processed fear and expectation. They created new theories about perceptual frameworks and cognitive adaptation. But in the end, they had to admit that they did not fully understand how Marcus had done what he did. The Corvani ambassador summed it up best during a diplomatic reception several months later. Your species is insane, he told the Earth delegation. Clinically and certifiably insane, and you have absolutely no survival instincts. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka smiled politely and took a sip of her drink. We prefer to call it adaptability, she replied. Meanwhile, Marcus and Cyrovan were learning how to be married. It was not easy. She existed partially in dimensions that he could not see or touch or comprehend. Sometimes she would be standing right next to him, and he would not know it because the parts of her that were visible had drifted into another plane of existence. Her emotions affected the physical world around her in strange and unpredictable ways. When she was happy, the local gravity would decrease slightly, and things would float gently off the ground. When she was sad, small animals within a mile would sicken and die. When she laughed, flowers would bloom even in the dead of winter. When she wept, the stars themselves seemed to dim. Marcus learned to read her moods through their bond, and through careful observation he learned that when she was nervous, she would flicker between dimensions rapidly like a candle flame in the wind. He learned that when she was content, she would settle into a more stable form that was almost comprehensible to human eyes. He learned that when she wanted to be held, she would project a humanoid shape that he could wrap his arms around. And Cyrovan learned about humans. She learned that they needed to eat 3 times a day and sleep for 8 hours every night. She learned that they communicated not just with words, but with facial expressions and body language. She learned that when Marcus smiled, it meant he was happy. But when he smiled while his eyes were sad, it meant he was remembering his first wife. She learned to constrain herself to 3 dimensions when they were together, so that he could see all of her at once. She learned to control her emotional projections so that her sadness would not kill the garden outside their window. She learned that pancakes were actually quite pleasant when absorbed through osmosis. One morning, Marcus woke up to find Cyrovan hovering above the kitchen in her full impossible form, attempting to cook breakfast. What are you doing? He asked sleepily. I am making pancakes, she replied proudly. You are making a mess. Marcus corrected her as he looked at the batter splattered across every surface. The batter is more difficult to control than I anticipated. Marcus laughed, and it was a real laugh full of joy and wonder at the absurdity of his life. Let me help you, he said. Together they made pancakes while the morning sun streamed through the windows, and Cyrovan hummed one of her 1,000-year morning songs, and Marcus wondered how he had gotten so lucky. Word of their unusual marriage spread throughout the galaxy. Other species began requesting human Diplomats for difficult negotiations. There was something about humans, they said, something that made them uniquely suited to bridging gaps between different kinds of beings. They did not just tolerate the alien and the strange and the incomprehensible, they embraced it. The Yathi hired a human to help them negotiate with the silicon-based Trovax. The negotiation had been stalled for decades because neither species could understand how the other thought. The humans sat down with both sides and within a week had found common ground that no one else had seen. The Corvani brought in a human mediator to settle a dispute with their ancient enemies, the Deshans. The human pointed out that both species actually wanted the same thing but were using different words to describe it. The war that had seemed inevitable was avoided everywhere. Humans went, they seemed to find connections that others had missed. They asked questions that no one else thought to ask. They looked for friends where others saw only enemies, and slowly but surely the galaxy began to change. What humanity brought to the stars. 10 years had passed since the blind bonding. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. And Marcus Chun stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Concord as humanity's first Consul General. The Great Hall of the Concord headquarters was even larger than the one at Terminus. Prime representatives from over 200 species filled the seats that rose up toward a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Cameras from every corner of known space were broadcasting this moment to trillions of beings. Today, the Concord would vote on whether humanity deserved a permanent seat on the High Council. It was the highest honor any species could receive. Only 12 species in the history of the Concord had ever been granted this privilege, and now humanity was asking to be the 13th. Beside Marcus stood Cyril Vanchi. Had learned to project a humanoid avatar over the years, a tall, graceful figure with silver skin and eyes like stars, but she kept her true form visible around the edges, angles that pointed in impossible directions, colors that had no names, a reminder of what she truly was. Consul General Chun said, the presiding voice of the council, "You may present humanity's petition." Marcus stepped forward and looked out at the sea of alien faces. He saw Corvani with their emerald scales and burning eyes. He saw Deshans with their calm expressions and measured breathing. He saw Drulkai with their 4 arms and stone-like skin. He saw hundreds of other species that he had learned to recognize over the past decade, and he saw fear. Even after 10 years, many of them still feared him, not because he was dangerous, but because he represented something they did not understand. You want to know why humanity should have a permanent seat on this council? Marcus began, and I will tell you. He paused and let his eyes sweep across the hall. But first, let me tell you what I will not say. I will not talk about our military strength, because we have almost none compared to the great empires. I will not talk about our ancient history, because we have only been traveling among the stars for 70 years. I will not talk about our technology or our resources or our economic power, because in all of these things we are still children compared to you. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not how petition speeches usually went. Most species spent hours bragging about their accomplishments. Instead, Marcus continued, I want to talk about what happened 10 years ago on Terminus Prime. He gestured to Cyril Vaughn, and she moved to stand beside him. Every species in this room sent their finest candidates to meet Princess Cyril Vaughn, he said. You sent your bravest warriors and your most stable minds and your most powerful psychics, and every single one of them ran. The hall was silent. They looked at the princes, and they saw something to fear. Marcus said, they saw the incomprehensible, and they decided it must be monstrous. We looked at the same thing, and we saw someone who was lonely. He reached out and took Cyril Vaughn's hand, her human-shaped hand, and the impossible geometries that surrounded it. That is what humanity brings to the stars, he declared. Not superior technology, and not military might, and not ancient wisdom, We bring the willingness to sit in the dark with things we do not understand. We bring the courage to ask questions that others are afraid to ask. We bring the ability to look at something terrifying and see a person who needs a friend. He pointed to the Corvani section of the hall. When your negotiations with the Travax had been stalled for 50 years, a human asked one simple question that no one else had thought to ask, and within a week the conflict was resolved. He pointed to the Deshan section. When your artists were struggling to translate their work for other species, a human teenager suggested a new approach that opened up your culture to billions of beings who had never understood it before. He pointed to the Drulkai section. When your colony on Karis Prime was dying from a disease that no one could cure, a human doctor refused to give up and spent 3 years searching for a solution until she found one. Marcus lowered his arm. In every case, the answer was the same. He said, "Humans do not accept that something is impossible just because no one has done it before. We do not assume that something is monstrous just because it is different. We do not give up on someone just because they are hard to understand." He smiled, and it was the same gentle smile that had confused Ambassador Tanaka 10 years ago. "You ask why humanity should have a seat on this council," he said, "and my answer is this: because we are the species that does not run." The hall was completely silent, even the presiding voice seemed unsure what to say. Then Cyril Vaughn stepped forward. Her true form rippled and shifted as she moved colors. Without names danced across her surface angles that defied geometry, pointed in every direction. Several of the delegates looked away, but she did not seem to notice or care. "I am Princess Cyralvan of the Vethkari Empire," she announced, "and I have lived for over 400 years. In that time, I have watched species rise and fall. I have seen empires crumble and new ones take their place. I have witnessed wars and plagues and disasters that shaped the course of history, but I have never seen anything like humanity." She looked at Marcus with something that might have been eyes. Through their bond, he felt her love and her pride and her absolute certainty. "In 10 years, this human has taught me more about connection than my people learned in 10,000, she said. He looked at something that had terrified the galaxy for millennia, and he saw only a person who needed to be loved. "The Vethkari Empire fully supports humanity's petition for a permanent seat on the High Council." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then the Kavani ambassador rose from his seat. "The Kavani Dominion supports the petition," he said gruffly. The Deshan delegation stood next. "The Deshan Federation supports the petition." One by one, the other species rose to their feet. The Drelkai Consortium, the Yathi Collective, the Trovax Assembly, 200 species standing in support of the small soft creatures from the edge of nowhere. The vote was unanimous as the hall erupted in applause. Marcus felt Cyrilvan's impossible form wrap around him in something that was very much like a hug. "You did it," she whispered through their bond. "We did it," he corrected her as they left the hall together. Marcus heard a young Corvani delegate whisper to her mentor, "Is it true that the human married her without seeing her face?" "Yes," the elder replied. "He chose her blindly. But why would anyone do that?" Marcus paused at the doorway and turned back with a smile. "Because the best things in life are the ones you have to take on faith." He said. Cyrilvan's impossible form rippled with warmth and joy. "And sometimes," Marcus added as he took his wife's hand, "you have to walk into the darkness to find the light." They walked out together into a galaxy that would never be quite the same. And somewhere in the archives of the Vethkari Empire, the poets began composing a new song. They called it the Song of the Blind Groom. It told the story of a human who walked into darkness and held a hand that was not a hand. Told the story of a princess who had been alone for over a century until a stranger asked if touching her caused her pain. It told the story of two lonely souls who found each other across the vast emptiness of space. The Vethkari would sing this song for thousands of years. They would call it the most human story ever told. And they would be absolutely right.